I am really excited to be here. What a full room. Thank you so much for joining my panel today. My name is Hiatt, and my talk today is on lessons in innovation from Silicon Valley Elite. And I am excited to share with you a couple of the principles of things that I've learned from my career in being a business partner to Jeff Bezos at Amazon, and Marissa Meyer, who's the VP of Search Products and User Experience at Google, and then now the CEO of Yahoo, and Eric Schmidt, CEO and then Executive Chairman at Google. So for the past 15 years, I've spent every waking moment with those people, working with them and learning from them. And I often like to say that it's better than business school, really, to get to work with them. And I've learned so many lessons on innovation and leadership and mentorship, and it just feels right to me to pass that on to the rest of the tech community. So thanks for being here with me today. I came into technology very much by accident. So my family, I was born on an Air Force base in Florida. My father was a fighter pilot, and my mother is an artist. So from my father, I get my very analytical, adventurous side. And from my mother, I get more of the creative design sensitivities that have really come together in a kind of a special way in my career, especially working at Google. But when I was almost 10, my family moved to Seattle. My father left the military and became a lawyer and got his first big job at a law firm in Seattle. So we moved to Redmond. And I did not know what was about to happen in Redmond at the time. My parents met on my mom's farm. They're both from Idaho. And so they were looking for a place that felt a little bit familiar to them while my dad was working in the big city. And so they moved to Redmond largely because they could get a big plot of land and our neighbors had horses and it felt really familiar. If you've been to Redmond lately, you know it no longer resembles that original Redmond at all. But I grew up and went to school surrounded by this booming technology era. And I feel really lucky to have grown up in an environment where it was so innovative and creative and the future was really happening. I didn't expect where that wave was going to take me. So after high school, I went to the University of Washington, and I studied there European studies, international studies, and I worked in the European Union Center. And when I was there, I came to really appreciate kind of the global economy, the way that technology, politics, economics were all very interwoven, and I kind of appreciated all that skill and learning. So my family was nearby, which I really liked. I'm from a really big family. I'm the oldest of 7 children, and so I like to say I come by my organizational skills and my bossiness really naturally from that, which served me well in my future career when I was bossing around people very senior to me. It was unintimidating. So while I was studying, I worked at the European Union Center, kind of learning more about global politics, economics. Dates me a little bit, but they were launching the euro towards the end of my time in undergrad. And so I just hosted some really interesting people while I was there. Heads of state, politicians, professors who came in and kind of explained this new economic union they were forming. And I got to be exposed to some really powerful and influential people, and I was a nobody. I shared an office the size of a closet with 6 other people and got paid nothing, but was really inspired kind of by the environment and the things that were happening in the globe that were kind of affecting everyone. And it sort of broadened my horizons and made me really think about how I want to be a player in that, what I want to do. So while I was there, my director of my program asked me, what are you going to do after graduation? And it had always been my plan to go into academics, to be a professor. And so I said, I think I want to work for a little while before going to do my PhD. And so he said, well, have you thought about applying at Amazon, which was 10 minutes away? And I said, I'm not really interested in tech. I want to go into academics. I was thinking of working for the World Affairs Council or something like that. And he's like, just throw your resume in. You never know what's going to happen. So I did. So I ended up going to Amazon, and that decision, just throw my resume into the ring, changed my life. And I've learned some really important principles and lessons along the way, and that's kind of what my talk is going to be about, is just these principles of leadership and innovation and mentorship that I've learned. And hopefully it's applicable to you. I imagine some of you are startup CEOs, some of you are working at big tech companies, but all of you are here at South by Southwest, I imagine, to learn something that's going to take you and your work to the next level, to inspire you. So I'm hoping to share some of those ideas and principles with you. So here's some of the first principles that I learned. I think it's very complicated. It's difficult to boil these three innovators down into just a few principles, but these are some of the things that have really stood out to me. So I'm going to talk about each of these. And the first is really being fearless. So my interviews with Amazon are a pretty funny story. So I wasn't that passionate about Amazon in particular. In fact, if I'm fully honest with you, I had never used Amazon at the time. Don't judge me too much, this was a long time ago. This was 2002, so it wasn't like an everyday staple. Like not everyone was ordering like their toilet paper and their groceries and like literally everything to survive on Amazon like it is today. But I remember sitting in the lobby, like waiting for my interview, and there was this sign on the wall of the 5 total countries that they were operating in now. They had just celebrated their 5th opening. And I'm really glad I read that while I was waiting, because that was one of the interview questions. It's like, are you familiar with where we're at? And I was like, I got this, even though I had no idea 5 minutes earlier where they were. So I went in for my first round of interviews, and it was with 10 senior executive assistants at the company. And I thought, okay, that's a lot of interviews. I was there from like 9 to 7. And they just wanted to get to know me, kind of my instincts, what my goals were, and provided some general answers. And I was really impressed with the quality of people there and the staff that they had, and just sort of the energy in that room. So I went away feeling pretty good about it, but I was considering other options and interviewing elsewhere, and I didn't hear anything back for 3 months. So I was like, right, okay, I'm not really what they were looking for, that's all right. Exploring other opportunities. And 3 months later, I get another call, and they say, we'd love to bring you back for a second round. Okay. So I come back, and they have me interview with all the SVPs in the company. I was like, why would you waste their time? But they interviewed me, and it was really hard. It was kind of typical like tech interviews where there was like brain teasers, and I found out later like 3 of them had been assigned to make me cry, which I didn't, thank goodness. But it was intense. That was my first experience with like tech interviews. And so at the end of that, I thought, okay, I'm not totally sure I want to work there. It seems really tense. But then I just, again, was still considering other options. But I was like, I thought I kind of clicked with some of those people, but I didn't hear anything back for another 3 months. And then finally, the recruiter calls me, and she's like, we'd love to bring you in for a 3rd round. And at this point, I'm like, okay, you like me or you don't. I can't do this like whole 10-hour day thing. After round 2, I went to this party, and a cocktail party's like, who are you, what are you doing? I was like, please don't ask me a single personal question. Like, I'm sick of talking about myself, I can't handle it. So she's like, please come in for another round. I was like, I don't know if I have that in me. And she's like, I promise, it's just one interview, just one person, just the last Sanage Tech. And when I arrived, it was with Jeff. And so Jeff, as you know, I mean, now he's a big media person. Everyone's sort of familiar with his personality. But Jeff is a very special person. This is one of my favorite photos I've ever I have of him. And this sums him up. Like, if you're in a room with Jeff, this is what he looks like most of the time. He has this huge laugh, like a laugh that will knock you out of your chair. And so I went into the room, and it was just me and Jeff. It was in his conference room right next to his office. And it's this very small, normal space, unassuming, no mahogany tables, nothing like that, very tech. And all 4 walls have whiteboards on them. And he's like, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Jeff. I've heard good things about you, looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better. He's like, I just have 2 questions for you. And I was like, oh God, because I was just exhausted by the last few experiences. He's like, I'm only ask you 2 questions. So the first one is, he uncaps a pen, stands up at the whiteboard, and says, don't worry, I'm going to do the math. And I'm thinking, okay, he thinks I'm a software engineer. He's like, this is the wrong interview, I'm in the wrong room. Like, I was not meant to be here. But he was like, no, I'm just going to ask you 2 questions. The first is, I want you to estimate the number of panes of glass in the city of Seattle. I thought, okay, here we go with the typical tech interviews. So I thought he just wants to see the way my brain works. He wants to see if I can break down something complex into manageable steps. This is fine. So I outlined for him. I was like, well, I would start here. I would do A, B, and C, and then I would account for outliers this way, and that's how I would get to the answer. And he was like, great, let's start. I was like, really? Okay. So we did. We filled up all 4 whiteboards with the answer, and then finally at the end, it felt like an eternity. I felt like I was there for like 3 hours. I think it was 10 minutes. I don't know. But once we finally got to an answer, he circled it, he capped the pen, and he said, I think that sounds about right, and sat down. And I was like, okay, Jeff he's kind of an intense person, but he does like to kind of see if you can carry through on a really complex problem. Then the second question was just, why do you want to work here? And at that point, I had learned a lot about the company through all these interviews. I'd learned about their values by the questions they had asked. I learned about their personalities. even though I thought a couple of them were mean. I found out later they weren't. But I really was carried up and excited about what he was trying to do. They were doing something no one had ever done before. And at that point, I realized how much I wanted to be a part of it. And so I just expressed that to him. I was like, I don't understand a lot about tech. This wasn't my vision for what my career wants to be, but I feel like I want to be a part of this for now. And so he stood up, he opened the door, and he said, I love this girl, you're hired, this is your desk, right next to his. So that's how I started at Amazon. And then my first project with Jeff was just a couple of weeks later. He hadn't spoken to me in the meantime. Very, very, very busy time in the company. I was hired in 2002, and we were still in the red. We still were having like very tense board meetings. Like Jeff was pitching Super Saver shipping, and then later Prime, which didn't go over well at first, but as we all know now, like single-handedly like turned the company around. So we were busy with some really big things. But one of the first projects Jeff gave me was he came to my desk and he said, Ann, I want to visit these places. He handed me a piece of paper. He's like, I've got a couple days to do it in next week, and he walked away. And I looked at it, and it was just this paper with this long series of numbers, just numbers. And I was like, these are not places or addresses. What is this? It's like another brain teaser or something. Maybe he's still testing me. But because my father's a pilot, I eventually recognized, oh, these are GPS coordinates. And I thought that was a weird way of asking to go somewhere. But so I figured out where these places were. I plotted them on this big life-size map of Texas. Who's here? This is where I have a love-hate relationship with Texas after this story. But so I plotted it out, and I was like, Jeff, I said to my manager, John, these places are really far from each other. There's no way he can do this within the 3 days that he wants to. And John just looked at me, like barely looked up, and he's like, well, no is not an answer, so figure it out. I'm like, okay, all right, here we go. So I thought, I'm 21 years old, and I was like, well, what's faster than a car? And I was like, a helicopter? Felt like a crazy idea. And so I said, John, what about a helicopter? And he's like, okay, do that. And I was like, I don't have a helicopter in my Rolodex. Where am I supposed to do this? But then I reached out to his jet pilots, and I got a recommendation. I booked my first helicopter, and off he went. I didn't know what he was up to, but he went in this helicopter, and he had a great trip, and he came back very happy. And I was like, okay, pass that next test. And then a couple weeks later, he's like, okay, I've narrowed it down. I want to go back to a couple of these properties. Let's do that on Tuesday. So I'm feeling good. I got this. Hired the same helicopter. Easy peasy. I know what I'm doing now. And then at this time, I am the junior most person in the entire company. I know I don't know what I'm doing. And so I'm trying to learn as much information as absolutely possible in each day. So I noticed every morning when Jeff comes in, he's carrying 3 newspapers, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Seattle Times. So I thought, right, I need to be reading what he's reading. So I started reading all those papers every morning. I read every briefing doc. I read everything, because I didn't know any of the players in tech. I had no business in this job. But so I was trying to learn as fast as I could. So one morning, that Tuesday morning, I came in really early. You all are techies, you know that's weird. I'm the only person in the building, and I'm reading the papers, and I'm reading his briefings, and really trying to learn more about the company. And I'm sitting there alone, and my desk phone rings. I thought, that's weird, it's really early. And it's his jet pilots. And the pilots say, I don't want to alarm you. And any early morning phone call that starts that way, you're instantly alarmed. I'm alarmed. My hands start shaking. I was like, what's going on? And they're like, well, we were listening to the scanner, and there's been a helicopter crash. And they're like, we don't know it's him. Obviously it's him. They're in the middle of nowhere, Texas, right? Obviously it's him, and my hands are just like shaking like this. And I'm like, okay. Like, we don't know. We're going to continue to listen to scanner, but it was just one of those automated beacons. It wasn't a person. It was like, helicopter crash. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm 21 years old, and I just killed Jeff Bezos. This is the beginning and the end of my tech career. So I'm like, right, okay, what do I do? So at first I think, at this point, because we're not profitable, all the stock value of Amazon is based in faith on Jeff, who might be dead. Who do I need to tell that to? So I thought, okay, the board. I'm 21. Sure, let's call an emergency board meeting. So there we go. Let's organize an emergency board meeting. Called my manager, got people in. Our brand new head of communications had just started the day before. So I was like, welcome to the company. So we did. So while we were gathering all those people and getting all the board members on a conference call, I thought, okay, I need to know if he's alive, if he's dead, maybe it's not him. How do I do that? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to call all the area hospitals and see if they had any helicopter crash victims. So I started calling, but I don't want to use Jeff's name because I don't want to create a news story that, like, it's Jeff. So I think, okay. So I call hospitals and I'm like, hi, did you have anyone come in after a helicopter crash? And they're like, what? And I was like, never mind. And I hung up. And then after the 5th or the 6th hospital, I finally got to one. I think it was the 6th. And I said, hi, did you have anyone come in from a helicopter crash? And they said, are you family? And I was excited because I found him, but really terrified because what did that mean? Is he dead? Is he injured? I don't know. And so I just say, okay, this is me. This is my number. Please have him call me back, like, as soon as you can. I just sit there, like, shaking and waiting. Eventually, he calls in. He calls in. We patch him right into the conference room, which is the room next to me. And he's speaking with the board members, and he's talking them out of doing, like, any kind of press announcement. He doesn't want to get out, because what I didn't know, and no one knew, was he was buying property in Texas for his private space company, Blue Origin. It was this big time around the X Prize, and he was trying to beat all the other players into private space tourism. And he didn't really want to create a story about that yet. So he's like, nobody knows, it's not going to get launched, it'll be fine. So this is what had happened. So that's his helicopter. So he was viewing properties. He needed, when you're, rocket testing, you need a lot of space. And so he was looking at all these big properties where he could be doing rocket launching. And they had taken off in Texas, as you all know. It gets really hot as the day progresses. So when they first arrived at this first property, it was fairly cool. And as it got hotter, the helicopter actually was not powerful enough for the number of people that was in it. Lesson learned, ever hiring a helicopter, dual engine only. I didn't know that. I didn't know. Single engine, not gonna cut it in Texas. So unfortunately, it was not powerful enough for the weight in it, given the temperature at the time. So when they tried to take off, it just sort of flipped around upside down and cracked open like an egg in the only water in Texas, because of course it cracked in this tiny, tiny creek. So it split open kind of like an egg, and they were underwater. They were trapped in this helicopter underwater, and Jeff, being the amazing person that he is, he saved everyone, pulled them all out of the helicopter, went up to the top of the hill, used the satellite phone that I insisted he bring, and he called for help using his real name. So they were rescued, and he got on the phone with the board, and he talked them out of doing a press announcement. And finally he's like, okay, after they all agreed to the plan going forward, he's like, can I talk to Anne? I was like, here's the part where I get fired. It's great. I think almost killing your boss is a fireable offense. That's all right, I understand, no hard feelings. And then he just said to me the kindest words I think I've ever heard in my life, and he said, Anne, I hear you're really good under pressure. And I just heard nothing after that. I honestly have no idea what he said after that, but I was just such a relief. And Jeff actually loves this story. It still hurts me a little bit every time I tell it. But so eventually the story did break. It was about 6 months later, and Business Insider published an article about it, and this was the photo that they did. So this is Jeff. Like, to me, this sums up Jeff, right? He's like, disaster zone behind me, and I'm the hero of my own story, right? And so this was a big lesson to me. This was a moment for me that really changed the way I saw myself and the way I approached problems going forward. One, anytime I have a hard challenge or a really rough time at work or a problem I don't know how to solve, I just think to myself, right, is this a helicopter crash? No, okay, I'm fine, I can handle this. So it really changed the way I saw myself, which was an important, at the beginning of my career, to feel like, I got this. I know I'm the junior most person in this room, but I'm gonna be okay. And you know what? Even when things explode behind me and it's a complete disaster, you can be the hero of your own story. And this is Jeff. Jeff is always the hero of his own story. He's got it. It's not because everything's perfect. Often things are a disaster, but the attitude that he has, the fearlessness with which he leads his company is the reason he's so successful today. So I really had a baptism by fire in my beginning of tech. So this kind of leads into the next principle. This is Jeff and me on my last day. Oh, look at us, we're both babies. Jeff and I both look a little different now. But this was literally my desk. His office was like right here. And sitting there every day, listening to Jeff, listening to every phone call, sitting in on every meeting, reading every email, being part of his design reviews, like getting to know his senior leadership changed everything for me. It was just such a gift. It was better than business school to sit there and learn to think like Jeff, to ask the questions he would ask, to understand what he would like and what he wouldn't, and just get those business instincts. I will forever be grateful for my time with him. I was with him for 3 years, and then I heard him he gave a press interview, which is now very famous, where they asked him, how did you start Amazon? How did you have the courage to He had been a vice president in D.E. Shaw. He had a very good job, a really safe place where he was learning a lot and contributing a lot. But he had this idea for Amazon that he knew was going to be huge. He even pitched it to D.E. Shaw to see if they wanted to invest in it, and they declined. And so he's like, you know what? I believe in this. I'm going to pack up my station wagon. I'm going to drive my wife Mackenzie and I all the way across the country. We're going to go to Seattle and start this company in a garage. As we all know, that worked out pretty well for him. But in that interview, he called it his regret minimalization principle. He knew at the moment that if he didn't take a chance on this, at the end of his life, that would be the regret. Not if he'd tried it and it failed and he just went back to D.E. Shaw. That he wouldn't regret, but he would regret not taking a chance. And it's now a very famous principle and something that Jeff lives by every day, for sure. So this fearlessness with which he leads was very inspiring to me. And so then I decided, okay, I'm going to follow his example. And the next chapter of the story is a little bit about humility, which might be kind of counterintuitive to this audience. But I think humility is a big part of being a true leader. Yes, you need to be bold. Yes, you need to be fearless. Yes, you need to sort of disregard, dissenting opinions in some ways. But humility is an enormous part of being successful. So with Jeff, he actually does that in his senior leadership. He welcomes all voices in the room. He encourages people to express dissenting opinions. And he doesn't think, even though he is one of the most brilliant people in the world, he doesn't think all his ideas are the best. He welcomes new voices and contributions. In fact, he has a formal role at the company that he calls shadow. And so his shadow is a position where you take someone fairly junior in the company who shows enormous potential, and he has them be his shadow for a year. And so when they first start, they just sort of like sit quietly in every meeting. They sit with him on every plane, they visit every company, and they just absorb all the information and the skills that he's absorbing. And at first, they're just sort of sitting there sheepishly, not sure what they're supposed to be contributing. Very similar to the way I felt when I started. And then eventually, as they know the context of all the players, all the goals that Jeff's trying to accomplish, they can contribute. They can give like a feedback on it at the end of a meeting. They can give an opinion on a deal that they're considering closing. And by the end of it, this person is Jeff's brain double. They think like him. They ask questions like him. They know all of the players. They have personal relationships of trust with all of those people. And Jeff maximizes his impact this way. So when I was there, the shadow was Andy Jassy, who we all know runs Amazon Web Services now, which is like in and of itself one of the biggest and most successful companies in the world. So Andy Jassy, I remember him like the first time he was going to fly with Jeff, he was like, never been on a private plane before. Like I had to coach him like, what's that like? How do you check in? What is that? And now, I mean, Andy is a very senior, accomplished executive. But it was nice for me to see the way in which one of the most influential business leaders in the world recognizes the need for a second opinion, recognizes that he will be better if he has someone to bounce ideas off of. Because the trouble, when all of you are massively successful like Jeff, you sometimes don't hear the truth. There's this really well-known quote where rich men and beautiful women never hear the truth. So you need to surround yourself by people who are going to tell you the truth. So that was the principle behind the Shadow program. So I decided after years of just gleaning this and being so inspired by the environment, I thought, okay, I need to follow this principle of regret minimalization. I need to follow my dream. My dream was not tech originally. It was to be in academics. So I decided to follow that. So I applied to PhD programs. I got in at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, got rid of everything I owned, drove my little Honda Civic from Seattle down to California with everything I own in the back, and just sort of started over. And this, it didn't do what I thought it was going to do, but I learned something I needed to learn, which is along with this humility principle. So when I came to Berkeley, I'd kind of been through a trial by fire. I was feeling very confident in my abilities to do hard things. But what happens at a PhD program, which many of you have probably experienced, is that you're sort of just stepping in midstream into this conversation that started 1,000 years ago and will continue 1,000 years after you left. And I'm sitting there being like, I don't know what you're talking about. All these people you're referencing. It was very intimidating at first. And so what I learned the most there was to be comfortable being the dumbest person in the room. Like, that's fine. Like, you can contribute, and then trusting yourself that actually I'm not the dumbest person in the room. Like, sometimes asking the simple question brings the conversation back to exactly where it needs to be. Because if you get so distracted in these complicated solutions and trying to really, do some complex things, you forget where you started from. So I learned the value of not being intimidated by joining a conversation with people very senior to yourself and just asking a question and not having a fear and being like, how am I going to be perceived? Is this stupid? And I think for perfectionist personalities, like many of us, I think that's difficult at first to be comfortable with that. So while I was there, I learned to just embrace the awkwardness sometimes and to find the value in having a simple discussion. So I really thrust myself into school, loved the environment. I was so glad to be in Berkeley. I just very inspired by the innovative, collaborative spirit, which you don't always find in PhD programs. But I had a great experience, and I learned to trust myself and to work hard and to think differently and to really question the status quo. But then I started getting mysterious recruiting phone calls from Google, because they heard I was in town. And so when she first started calling, I was like, no, thanks. Been there, done that, super happy. I loved my experience, but I'm really happy in academics doing what I'm doing. I don't think Google's been told that very many times, because I thought she really just thought I was playing hard to get, which I wasn't. But eventually she talked me into coming down and hiring. And so I came, and she was like, don't you just want to see campus? You've kind of heard about it. And it was, I'd heard the hype, and I heard about the free food and the dogs and stuff. So I was like, okay, that might be fun to see. That's how they got me, basically. So I interviewed at Google, and I just felt something really special immediately. So I interviewed with Marissa Meyer, who was the vice president of search products and user experience at the time. And that basically meant she was in charge of everything that brings in eyes. The homepage, Gmail, Maps. Someone else got to worry about monetizing it, but we just got to make cool things. And I just was very, immediately taken with her leadership style and the way that she ran her team. And I knew that something really special was happening. Eric Schmidt, this CEO, was very famous at the time for the way he hired Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl was nervous about coming on board at Google and what role would she have. And Eric famously said to her, when you're invited on a rocket ship, you don't have to ask which seat. You just get on, right? So I just got on. I was joined this crazy train, got on this team of 700 people who were just working insanely hard, trying to make really cool things and do things that no one's done before. So I did. I joined Google. This is literally the building, my first building, building 43 of my first office. And while I was with Marissa, I learned some really important things from her leadership style about the way that she draws the best from her team. She cares a lot about the individual people she's working for, and she works you really hard, and she gets the best out of you. And I was really just happy to be there and to be with her and to learn from the smartest people in the world. Thank goodness I had learned to be unintimidated by that, because I was definitely had no idea what they were talking about. As you know, tech is all acronyms, and people are known by their email addresses, not their real names, no full names. So we were organizing meetings and trying to put stuff together, and I had no idea most of the time what she was talking about. But I was like, okay, we're just gonna get this done. So you just sort of dived in. And the problem was I joined her team when she had been understaffed for a really long time. And so there was so much backlog of work and so much that I needed to get accomplished that it just was overwhelming. I was working 18-hour days easily, and it was just all-consuming. And there was this moment where there was a meeting that with Eric Schmidt, and Eric's assistant had forgotten to invite Marissa. And it was a very important meeting, and Marissa had a conflict that she could not move, and she was so angry. She was so angry that this happened, and she was upset with me. And I was like, that's not my job. I don't schedule these meetings. I have nothing to do with that. But she was like, you should have known. You should have these relationships. People shouldn't forget you, shouldn't forget me. They shouldn't forget that our team exists. We're important. And she was very upset. And at first, it really hurt my feelings. I was like, I am working my tail off here. I left my program. It was I'm not a crier, but I cried for a couple days because it was so hard for me to leave my PhD. It meant so much to me. It had been my dream for so long. And I was like, I left it because I thought working with you would be really special. So I had a little pity party for a minute, and then I thought, you know what? The next day I was thinking about it, and I was like, she's kind of right. She was right. This is displaying a problem. I had been so focused and heads down in what I was trying to do to just keep the ship afloat that I hadn't got up. I didn't eat lunch away from my desk. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't talk to anyone. I hadn't built any relationships in the company. And that's what I needed. To be successful in my job as a business partner and to get the code reviews done at the right time, to get the right people in the room, to plan these global trips in the right way, I needed friendship currency. I needed relationships of trust built that I could draw from in order to get really hard things done at the pace and the scale at which we were trying to do them. So I decided she's right. I did need to value getting up and networking in order to be successful there, especially given what we were trying to do. And you all know, like, Google's famous for our free food. It took me a while to figure out why they did that. Like, when you have these micro kitchens, it encourages you to get up, to stop being so like siloed thinking about your single project, and to have like a maps engineer chatting with someone working on Gmail, chatting with someone working on a design, restructure or something, and then have this cross-pollination of ideas that's built into our culture so that you really invest in these relationships and building something that's best for the whole instead of just siloed perspective. So I finally gave myself permission to get up from my desk occasionally and to build that, and it really made my work more impactful. So, and I think that comes back to the humility principle of like realizing like me heads down working 18 hours a day is actually less valuable to the company and to my own development than to collaborate with my peers or to take a moment to like get up, go to the micro kitchen, chat with someone, go to drinks with someone after work or something to really solve these hard problems. So humility is something that Marissa she invited all voices in the room. And this is something I feel like tech sometimes doesn't do really well, is if we were in a meeting, she was in code review or in a design, UI design meeting, she was really good at noticing when people weren't speaking in the room. So I encourage you as CEOs or founders, or even if you're just running a project, if there's someone quiet in the room, like call on them, like encourage all the voices to be heard, because a lot of times the person sitting quietly has been more thoughtful and more contemplative and has something unique to offer than the people who love to hear themselves talk. And this is especially important when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, because a lot of the voices who are maybe in the minority, either in idea or background, pause a little bit longer. So in your leadership style, really focus on including all voices in the room and encouraging those who are more thoughtful or quiet to be able to share those ideas in a safe space. I think that was one of the most special things that I learned from her on her team. So the third is being an influencer. So I don't mean this like social media. I don't mean like posting selfies with your coffee and your yoga pants. I mean like really being a unique voice in the industry. So with I really encourage you to be solutions driven. And kind of a silly example, like a fluffy example of this, is we had Secretary Clinton come to Google a while ago, and she was doing a book signing. And I kind of volunteer with the Talks program because it gives me an opportunity to see lots of different people in the company, and also we bring in some of the world's most talented people to speak at Google. Politicians, media, influencers. Just we figure if it's interesting to our users, it's something that should be interesting to us. So she came to Google, this is during the campaign, early on in the campaign, and we were signing. So you see this girl standing up with the blue shirt, she's looking real concerned right now. She's not super happy. I took this picture because that's been me making that face many times, and I thought it was really funny. So what's happening here is Googlers are not shy. We had bought some books, we had sort of predicted how many people might come, and we massively underestimated how many people are coming to this book signing. So one of the volunteers helping this event rushed the table, and that's why she's looking so weird, and she was like, ran up to the table and was like, we have a problem. And Saida, Clinton's assistant, who I really love, she instantly like took that person to the side. She's like, we do not have problems, we have solutions. And I love that. Yes, we don't have problems, we have solutions. So never rush the table with a problem. Like whether you're running your own company and you're broadcasting this to your senior executives, or if you're a PM on a project that may not be going the way you think, you don't present this as we have a problem, right? You're presenting solutions. Right, here's what I recognized. This is happening, here are my solutions, A, B, or C, and you have an educated discussion on that. That was an important part. So this is another example. This is me and Marissa, also a long time ago. So we were doing a global tour. So we did trips with some of our youngest engineers, most talented engineers, to go around the globe and to learn about different markets and the way that our products are being used differently. Tokyo might use it in a different way than Israel or Bangalore. So we explored ways in which we could customize for our different markets and also learn from them. Often they're using tech in a way we hadn't anticipated, so we want to learn from them. So my relationship with Marissa really grew when I also came to her as solutions driven. I wanted to influence her in a way. I thought I brought a unique perspective with my background in international studies. So in this global trip, I really wanted to offer a lot. So I contributed to the briefings. I talked to her a lot about the politics, and she invited me to join some of the meetings. Something that I had never done before, but she saw that talent and interest. And then this is my friend Reggie. Please excuse the celebrity section of this talk. But this, so my friend Reggie, this is Reggie Love. He was special assistant to President Obama. And he and I sort of bonded because we both have really weird jobs. We work for some of the most powerful people in the world, and people don't really get what our jobs are, what we do. But Reggie actually got his job with President Obama very similarly to the way I did. He was just a volunteer working for the senator's office in DC, and they brought together all of the interns into one room and tried to assign projects. And Reggie noticed that no one was signing up to work in the mailroom, because that sounds invisible and thankless. That sounds horrible. But he volunteered, and he thought, okay, I can have an impact. And this was shortly after President Obama's very famous speech at the DNC, so he was getting so much mail. Some of it was really important, like invitations to speak or partnerships or whatever, and a lot of it was just fan mail, some of it was crazy people. There was a lot to sort through. So Reggie took the opportunity to be like, right, okay, I'm gonna take this project and I'm gonna automate it. And he changed everything. He turned around the time, the turnaround time was went from months to days. He really got it in the hands of the right influencers, and he, through this thankless, invisible job, was noticed by the senior staffers and recommended to President Obama to be his right-hand man. Changed his life by doing some simple, thankless task. So sometimes for you or for people who are working for you, there's a job that doesn't seem that exciting. There's a job that seems invisible or thankless, but sometimes that can really lead to big things that can change your life. So the next principle is being curious. I think one of the people ask me all the time, what are the similarities between these three influential business leaders that I've worked for? And curiosity for me is number one. Curiosity is important. In fact, last week when Eric and I were in Seoul for meetings, someone asked him on stage, what is the number one quality in a leader that you look for? And he said curiosity. So curiosity means several things. Not only do you ask questions, but do you recognize that there are other smart people in the room? And two, are you unsatisfied with the status quo? Do you question your own way of doing things? Are you learning new things every day? Are you putting yourself in an environment where you can learn new things and have different impact? And so curiosity is something that Eric embodies. I now work for Eric Schmidt. When I started with him, he was the CEO. He transitioned to executive chairman. And he is insatiably curious just by nature. He brings that into his leadership style, but he also maximizes that in his personal life. So with Eric, he recognized, as he was CEO, he started spending all of his time on planes. And so he thought, okay, if I'm gonna live my life on a plane, I might as well do the fun part, which is flying it. So he became a jet pilot, because that's who he is. So he does for a hobby what people do for a living, basically. That's kind of his speed. And after a while, after several years with him, he told me, I want to become a helicopter pilot now. And I was like, okay, I have a history with helicopters. No helicopters. I was like, the second you have a crash, I'm retiring. That's the end of me. I can't do that again. But he did. He learned to be a helicopter pilot. And it sort of benefited us in an unexpected way. Because a few years ago, we were doing a tour. We were trying to focus on bringing the next 1 billion people online, underserved, underrepresented people who haven't traditionally had access to technology, to desktops or laptops, and are now on mobiles. So we were meeting with government officials across Africa to encourage them to lay fiber while they were laying their sewer lines or water lines, and also working with manufacturers to get affordable mobile phones. So we were there, and we were visiting with big cities, big governments, but we wanted to see the way that average people were using that technology. And because Eric was a helicopter pilot, we were able to visit them. So this is a plaque on Eric's desk, literally on his desk. This embodies his principle. If at all possible, say yes. And he really lives that to the fullest. So when we were in Africa, we flew a helicopter to the middle of the Masai Mara and met with this village to see the way that they use mobile technology to benefit them. So they use a single cell phone for their whole tribe. They use it for weather data so they know when to harvest. They use it for medical information when someone's sick. They use it for education for their girls who don't go to school. That way they can have some sort of education there in their homes. And this wouldn't have been possible if Eric wasn't the kind of person who was like, I'm gonna be a helicopter pilot. We literally wouldn't have had access to them. So the last and final principle is being balanced. All you are looking at me like, none of this sounds balanced. I agree, I know. being balanced in tech is kind of a different thing, right? It's kind of, in fact, a friend of mine went to a Krav Maga class. He was trying to get in shape, and he went to the first workout, and he was dying, like sweat head to toe, totally exhausted. And the instructor finally was like, okay, we'll take a quick break. And he's like, thank God. And then they were like, now rest while running. And they ran laps in between the things. And I think in tech, we rest while running, right? Like I recognize this is sort of an impossible thing. In fact, so you know I'm not a hypocrite, this is my birthday a few years ago on Eric's jet. We were in 4 states that day. We started in Arizona, we went up to Denver, we went down to North Carolina, ended the day in New York. I literally had no idea what day it was, and by the end of it, I had forgotten it started out as my birthday. But Eric remembered, and he gave me a little piece of cake, and we celebrated. So yes, sometimes this is what resting while running looks like. What can you do? You have to pick your battles. But I think one of the important things to remember is resting while running, like maximizing your network, asking questions, being humble, really delegate as much as you possibly can, because you need to be accessible as a leader, and you need to be focusing on what only you can do. What can you do that no one else can do? As a last example, when I was first at Google, we were launching the chat feature within Gmail, and the engineers wanted to test it. So they encouraged Googlers, like, right, why don't you add like the top 5 people that you talk to every day, and we'll test out this new product. So I think all 700 people on the product team added me in their top 5, and we broke it. We completely broke the chat feature, and that highlighted to me that I needed to make a change. I needed to delegate a lot more of those responsibilities, because then I was a bottleneck, and so it inspired me to like delegate more, to assign more products, and to get through it. But these, I think, 5 principles have helped me to, one, maximize the most out of the leaders that I've been partnering with. Eric, Jeff, Marissa really embody these themselves, and to surround yourself as CEOs or as founders with people who have the same mission, who help maximize your output and your potential within your own companies, and to bring that out in your own employees, to encourage these principles to maximize the impact of the brilliant people that you've hired. I'm now in transition. As you probably know, a few weeks ago, Eric transitioned from executive chairman to technical advisor. So now I'm looking for opportunities to like have this impact and pay it forward, which is why I was interested in speaking at South by, because I'm now looking for working on consulting with some startup companies. I'm seeing these principles are generally applied all across all founders, and I'm hoping that they've been helpful to you as well. So with that, I have a few more minutes for questions, if you'd like to share. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. I'm really curious about this brain double concept. Is that something you've seen in other companies, and what are the advantages and challenges?
Yeah, I think Jeff does it best. And a lot of people normally do that through their senior leadership, through their teams of bringing all people into the room. For example, at Google, we have a weekly sync with all of our Alphabet execs on Tuesdays. So that brain double of, if you're working on projects that are cross-disciplinary, keeping people in the room really has provided value. But I think Jeff has really maximized that in a unique way by creating this shadow. It's also something I see working really well if you have your SVP or a co-founder. Like, it's a kind of a delicate art of like finding a way of not wasting each other's time and really maximizing and delegating while still staying in sync. So I know it's a delicate balance, but I feel like particularly innovative companies all have some version of this, whether it's the shadow or the senior staff meetings, or maybe a partnership within your executive office, like with your senior staff and with your executive assistant team, that kind of thing. Like keeping people on the same page. I find leaders that aren't very successful are those that are sort of more secretive with their information. Like you don't need to know that, so I'm not going to share. And those who are more naturally inclined to share the larger vision get the most out of their people. So I would encourage you to be the kind of leader that's like shares the larger perspective rather than the singular task, so that people know the larger problem they're solving for.
Awesome.
It's a big difference.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. That was a fantastic talk. I was just wondering if you had any more detail about how you might balance saying yes whenever possible,
Yeah.
but also telling the truth, because that can be really difficult in tech.
Yeah, so the question was, how do you balance the principle of saying yes with telling the truth, which can be difficult in tech? So in terms of telling the truth, do you mean that in terms of like being realistic with your expectations?
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and you know, and just being able to say when something, is not possible, or
When
gonna
something
take
isn't.
much longer.
Yeah,
or,
how do you recognize when something isn't possible while living the principle of saying yes? That's a great point. I think it is important to, so yes, Eric, so the general principle is saying yes when possible. He does that in a way where some executives, once you get to that level, you're used to being perfect. You're used to being the smartest person in the room. And this idea of saying yes is like going into a meeting where you might not be the singular authoritative voice and being comfortable in that space. Saying yes to going to a country you've never been to, or to a dinner with people that you don't know. And so the principle is mostly around exposing yourself to new ideas and new ways of doing things. I really appreciate your point about like, you cannot do it all. Sometimes you have to say no, and no to things that might be really exciting and interesting, and delegating those, that's absolutely true. But yeah, I think the general principle is don't disregard an opportunity because it makes you uncomfortable or brings you out of your area of expertise. In fact, that's the opportunity for the most growth, which I think is what that plaque means to him. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Real quick, I just wanted to say that I'm the last of 7.
Oh, you are?
My wife and I drove our Civic to UC Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
And after that, we lived in Redmond for 17
No
years.
way. We're living
So
this
we have a
like
lot in
weird.
common.
We do. That's amazing.
I'd like to be a much more effective leader, and I identify with some of those, but the influential one is
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
I just recently did the Strength Finders with
Oh,
Gallup.
I know it well. Yeah.
And that was the quadrant that I was most empty, just had communication. So with these leaders here, you mentioned delegating, having other people do things. How much would you say that, being able to influence and, get over fears of being like a salesy kind of person?
Yeah.
How would you handle that versus delegating and having somebody else do that?
I think that's a really interesting point, and I'm glad you brought up Strength Finders, because I did that assessment several years ago, and it was very enlightening to me. And what I found, as you know from doing that experience, is the principle behind Strength Finders is that you identify your top 5 strengths, and you spend all your time on those. You actually don't need to worry about the areas in which you're lacking if you partner with someone with complementary talents. So for me, when I did Strength Finders, it identified that I'm a doer. I can break down something really, really complicated to 100 manageable steps, and that's how we can accomplish moonshots. I am not the moonshot dreamer. That's a talent where the person I pair with. I am the doer. I get it done. And so for you, if this is an area in which you're less strong, I would partner with someone that's that way, that's sort of more of the personality, the gregariousness, and you can be heads down. Like, there's a lot of leadership at Google who is very heads down, engineer, data driven. Like, they're not applying it in any way. When you're partnered with the right person, it actually maximizes your talent. So I wouldn't worry about that, but I would hire well. I would hire someone that you fully trust to represent you in that way. And I actually think that's the best use of your time. Like, focus on what you're doing really, really well, and hire someone to be that influencer, that spreader, that kind of outside presence to your team or to whatever. And it doesn't take away from what you're offering. It only maximizes. It's a catalyst for what you're influencing. So I actually think you're on the right track. Yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, I have a 2-part question, if I may. So the first question is, how would you modify that list of 5 attributes specifically for chiefs of staff? Now, granted, they're leaders as well, but what is it specifically about chiefs of staff that you would change compared to this list? And the second part question is, not everyone is, I guess, lucky enough to have been chiefs of staff at different companies. So how would you recommend sort of modifying or customizing your resume if you've not been a chief of staff, but you have experience and you want to apply to a chief of staff position?
Interesting. So I've actually given this talk to administrative professionals conferences around the world, and the list is surprisingly similar. So I think my approach to being a chief of staff is my goal really is to be the shadow, to be the brain double. And I think this is taking that traditional responsibility. Like if you look at in government, for example, they have a lot of chiefs of staff. Those are people who are just implementing, and sometimes it's a very reactionary role of like, I just do as I'm told and I'm taking care of my action items. My approach is very different. I'm very proactive. I consider a huge part of my role to be the strategy setter, to make the suggestions, to help my executives like pivot. If we're focusing on one particular relationship and then something happens in the news and we move over here, I need to be the one to get him or her like on track real quick so we don't lose any time. So for me, these are principles I actually teach chiefs of staff. Because I think in order to be a good business partner, you need to think like an executive, act like an executive, and represent them at all times. So I think a couple of you, my friends here, have heard me give this talk before, and it was pretty similar to that audience. So I would really encourage, if you want to be a very effective business partner, you need to be executive quality. And that comes from, I was 21, did not know what I was doing. I did that by just educating myself, taking the extra step to know the industry, read what he's reading, join the meetings. Sometimes I would sit down, I would just invite myself to a meeting. I would sit down, nobody invited me, but I would just be there because I wanted the context so that I could give feedback in a way that was educated and helpful. And that built the foundation I needed to be strategic and to offer strategic solutions. Your second question?
It's about the resume.
Resume.
Yeah.
So if you haven't traditionally been an assistant, which is sort of the natural flow, normally you go from an assistant, you learn in teams, you do some project management, then you become chief of staff. I think it's very applicable if you've been a project manager to go in. So the skills that I would highlight if you're coming from a project management standpoint are the strategy, knowing the internal workings of the company and how to get things done within your organization. And I would really highlight your industry knowledge. Because in order to be a brain double with an executive, you really need to be able to offer those solutions. And third, and one thing I did not include here that's very applicable for chiefs of staff is sort of having a chameleon-like approach. I need to adjust based on the person I'm presenting to. For example, with Eric, he's very data-driven, so I need to help him make a decision. I present stuff with the numbers, the charts, the graphs, the cost-benefit analysis. When I was presenting to Marissa, it was a little bit more speaking to the spirit of the team, what we were trying to accomplish, design review results, those were the kind of things she learned too. So to be an effective chief of staff, you need to be a chameleon because you need to be able to speak effectively to your primary executive. And if you're managing all these senior executives who are very senior to you, knowing how to communicate up in a way that they hear might be a little bit different for each of those people. So being able to adjust your communication style, I think, is an essential skill for someone in this role.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Anne.
Hi.
First of all, thank you so much. Very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
So you said, you've also, I'm pretty sure you've been involved in hiring a lot of executives.
Yes.
So one of my questions is, what's your favorite interview question? So to really figure out that you have the right executive there with the right leadership skills.
Ooh, let's see, that's the first one that comes to mind. I don't know if it's my favorite, but the first one that comes to mind, I've kind of stole from Jeff's approach of I want to understand how someone thinks. So I ask a question that seems really stupid on the surface, but actually is very telling in the answers. And the question I ask is, if you had a Coke machine on a cruise ship, and you knew the next day your executive had to go and buy something from that machine, what would you do to test it and make sure it would always work? Sounds super stupid, right? That's very simple, but everyone knows what a vending machine looks like. Everyone's been on a boat. And so I like to see okay, what do they do? Do they think of oh, do they have change? Because does it take credit cards? Most people only have credit cards. You get that basic level of thinking. And then you say, great, keep going for 5 more minutes. And then they get a little crazy and they're okay, currency, electrical supply, are there multiple machines? What's the stocking process? And then when you get to once they fully run out of ideas, say, great, 5 more minutes. And then they panic. 5 more minutes of ideas, I've clearly been talking and then some people can dig deep. Some people get silly. I've literally had people answer that question being well, I would train a penguin to do it. Really? Okay, that's not where I'm going with this question because they can't think of anything more. But those who can really dig deep and be okay, all right, actually here's something that no one else has thought of. It's very telling about someone. Do they exhaust themselves? Are they creative or driven in that way? Or do they just sort of give up? It tells you a lot about their thought process.
Oh, perfect. And then, sorry, one more thing. Because you've talked a lot about your career, what is one thing, if I were to look on your resume, that you're really proud of that's not on your resume?
I mean, my first thought is of a project, but I don't know if that's what you're going for. Maybe the project is a good illustration of the principles I'm proud of. So when Google acquired Motorola, part of the acquisition, we got their 2 corporate jets, and we'd never had corporate jets before. We just we wanted to be really lean, and we didn't really like the feel of having corporate jets, so we would just charter when we needed to. But now we owned 2, and we had to figure out what to do with them. And so we didn't have a team to deal with that, so I just said, okay, I can figure out some processes around that. And so I created our jet policy. Now we have a fleet. Now we have several, and I created the stipulations under what circumstances does it make sense to use a jet? What are the qualifications? What's the approval process? What's the payments? How do we do cost centers? And that sounds like a really boring, stupid task, but it kind of goes back to like my example with my friend Reggie of like how he became the right-hand trusted partner with Obama. Sometimes you do the thankless jobs and you learn a lot about the company that then informs your work going forward. And I think in that I got to know the executives really well. I got to know where are we going in the globe, what are our priorities, and it really informed my work. And I had a really exciting inside business knowledge I probably wouldn't have had exposure to otherwise. Now we have literally like 20 people running that team, and it's this big operation. But being able to take something and just grow it from nothing into something was really rewarding. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hello, Ann. Thank
Hi.
you for that great presentation.
Thank you.
So my question I had was around being balanced. I could relate to the bottleneck of when you're involved in so many things.
Yeah.
So, but one of the problems I have is when trying to delegate, trusting that the person I'm delegating to is going to think it's just as important as I do. And so I still have issues like totally letting them take care of it, or maybe sometimes they might let the ball drop, and then it still falls back on how it looks to me, to my who it's for. So I was wondering if you have those issues and how do you deal with those?
Yeah, I have definitely experienced that, and I think there's two ways to go about it. One is if you've got the person already, you just have to deal with who you've got. There's a way to deal with that. Secondly, I think it comes back to hiring, which is my second part of my answer. First, if you're just dealing with who you've got, someone who's already been hired and is on your team, keeping it on track, I think building up a relationship of trust for the both of you is really important. So doing regular checkpoints. What you don't want to do in delegation is then micromanage, which wastes both of your time, right? So you don't want to be doing that. But if you have like these micro check-ins where you can kind of just self-correct before they're like suddenly way over here and you wanted them here, I think those check-ins are something that often gets overlooked by leadership. Like these little touch points. Eric's very good about that. Just a quick check-in, quick email, something in the hall between meetings kind of keeps you both on the same page, and then don't cancel your regular one-on-one with that person if you're really trying to direct. Second is fixing the problem entirely comes from hiring. My general principle around hiring is hire someone that you think is better than you. And I know that sounds like creating a competitive environment where you're getting yourself out of a job, but that has never happened to me. I always try and hire someone that I think is smarter or better, has a better experience for me, because that creates a team environment where we are co-collaborators and very equal. And I have never had an issue with them trying to take over or being power hungry, maybe because Google's sort of, our culture isn't like that. But I think if you can hire someone that's like at your level, you will more easily have that relationship of trust. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you.
I have 1 minute, so last two, super quick.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
That story with Marissa about missing the meeting resonated deeply with me.
Really?
Many areas where I should have known, there should have been better alignment, et cetera.
Right.
How do you impose on important people when you feel like you're stealing their time for a passive conversation?
Do you mean in passing just to build a relationship?
Yeah.
I try and always have a point of like what I'm trying to accomplish. So I try and set the stage of like why I'm chatting with them. I'd be like, for example, I was early on in the company and I volunteered. When I first worked with Eric, we had senior executive meetings on Mondays, and they would always do a full packet of information of like our mergers, our deals, or whatever, and all of those executives had to put the packet together. It was due on Fridays, never finished. I volunteered to work on it, even though that meant working every weekend, so I could build these relationships with those executives. They would know my name, they would be grateful, we would get to partner, and I would understand the priorities. So one, volunteering on a project that just exposes you to them is really helpful. And two, if it is just a hallway conversation, setting the stage of like, hi, I was really looking forward to meet you because, oh, this is my timer, I set for myself. I was really looking forward to meeting you because I think understanding more of your org would help us do X, Y, and Z. And so, and that can be the end of it, just like, I look forward to like working with you more, because then when they see you, they're like, oh, that's that guy who was interested in this, and then they come to you and loop you in a way that they might not have thought of you that way naturally in the past. So I even find just like, hey, this is my goal, this is what I'm doing here, these are my goals, like, that's it, you can move on, and then it continues naturally. That's helpful, yeah.
Hi, about these great leaders, what common quality or attribute would you say that they have that is unachievable, unattainable for other human beings? That it's like in their gene pool and we just can't.
Okay, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before, actually. That's unattainable for humans. All of them are superhuman, I agree with that. Like there is something so driven in them that they just cannot sleep. Sincerely, like none of these people need money. None of these people need to work. The thing that's special that I find you cannot teach is that internal drive to just be better, do more, have more impact. they would rather be doing this than being on vacation. None of them are capable of vacations, I'll tell you that right now. Like 24 hours in and they're like, I gotta get out of here. They just can't handle it, not because they don't enjoy relaxing, it's just because they sincerely love their projects so much that nothing else is as fun to them. Like they've found their passion, and I think that's something that's not teachable. That's just something very special about each of them. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.